Imagine a tiny, isolated farmstead deep in the Bavarian countryside. The year is 1922. It's a place called Hinterkaifeck. And what happened there one cold March night would become Germany's most infamous unsolved mystery. It's the evening of March 31st. The Gruber family, 6 people in total, are inside the farmhouse, but by morning, they will all be dead. Andreas Gruber, 63, his wife Chiselia, 72, their widowed daughter Victoria, 35, her 2 children, 7-year-old Chiselia and 2-year-old Joseph, and finally, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived just that morning. All 6 were slaughtered. Their skulls shattered with a mattock, a type of pickaxe. Their bodies were found stacked almost neatly in the barn, covered with hay and an old door. After committing this horrific act, the killer didn't flee. He walked back into the silent farmhouse. And he stayed. The terror at Hinterkaifeck didn't start that night. It had been building for months. The previous maid had quit in a panic, claiming she heard footsteps in the attic and saw shadowy figures outside the windows. Andreas Gruber, a stern and often violent man, brushed off her fears. But even he couldn't explain everything. One morning, he found a single set of footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the forest directly to the farmhouse door. But there were no tracks leading away. It was as if the visitor had vanished into thin air. Then, a newspaper appeared on the kitchen table, a Munich paper the family didn't subscribe to. A strange set of house keys disappeared, only to be found weeks later hanging from a rafter in the barn. At night, the family heard scratching sounds coming from inside the walls. Food would go missing from the pantry. On March 30th, the day before the murders, Andreas told his neighbors he had finally seen the intruder, a man with a lantern moving through the woods near the farm. He followed the man's tracks, but they suddenly stopped in the middle of the forest. The very next day, the new maid Maria arrived. That evening, Friday, March 31st, the postman passed by and saw smoke curling from the chimney. He assumed all was well. But when neighbors tried to call on the family on Saturday, April 1st, no one answered. The same thing happened on Sunday. By Tuesday, April 4th, concern had turned to dread. A small group of men, led by a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, made their way to the isolated farm. The dog barked frantically from inside the barn but wouldn't come out. When the men forced their way in, they stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable horror. It seems Andreas, his wife, their daughter Victoria, and their granddaughter Chiselia had been lured into the barn one by one and killed with the mattock. The killer then went back into the house. He found 2-year-old Joseph asleep in his crib and murdered him there. The new maid, Maria, was the last to die, killed in her room, her suitcase still unpacked beside her. She had been at the farm for less than 12 hours. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. The search party noticed that someone had been living in the house after the murders. There was fresh bread on the table and half-eaten meals in the kitchen. The fireplace had been tended to over the weekend. Someone had fed the cattle, milked the cows, and even fed the family dog. The killer had stayed at the farm for at least 3 days, living amongst his victims, before disappearing without a trace. When police from Munich arrived, they found the murder weapon, the mattock, wiped clean and returned to its spot in the barn. There was no blood trail, no footprints leading away from the property. The killer had simply vanished. The list of suspects was long, yet led nowhere. Andreas Gruber was a hated man. He had even served prison time for an incestuous relationship with his own daughter, Victoria. Many in the village believed her son, Joseph, was actually Andreas's child. This brings us back to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who found the bodies. He had once been Victoria's lover and had even paid child support for Joseph for a time. His behavior at the crime scene was also odd. He moved the bodies around, claiming he was checking for signs of life. Other theories pointed to drifters, a spurned lover of Victoria's, or even something supernatural from local folklore. But none of these theories could explain the strange events leading up to the murders, the footsteps in the attic, the mysterious newspaper, the tracks that disappeared into thin air. In a desperate, and frankly bizarre, move, The heads of the victims were removed during the autopsy and sent to clairvoyants in Munich, hoping they could somehow reveal the killer's identity. They couldn't. The bodies were buried without their heads, and the farm itself was demolished a year later, erasing the crime scene forever. The mattock eventually vanished from the police evidence room for nearly a century. The Hinterkaifeck massacre remained a cold, dark mystery until 2007. A group of police academy students were given access to the original 1922 case files as part of a final project. These files had been locked away for decades. And in a sealed appendix, tucked away in the archives, they found something that turned the entire case on its head. But before we get to what those students discovered, let's fast forward to today. Right now, in the forest clearing where the Hinterkaifeck Farm once stood, a retired detective is pointing a ground-penetrating radar at the earth. The screen flickers to life. And deep beneath the spot where the barn used to be, something large and metallic is buried. Something buried exactly where the murder weapon, the mattock, was supposedly found all those years ago. Beneath the quiet German soil, something large and metallic was waiting. Retired Detective Paul Mulhouse lowered the ground-penetrating radar, his eyes fixed on the glowing outline taking shape on the screen. This was the moment he had imagined for 17 long years. It all began when he was a young instructor at the police academy, watching a new generation of recruits unseal an envelope from 1922. A time capsule from one of Germany's most haunting unsolved crimes. The date was November 12, 2024, with quiet authorization from the Bavarian State Criminal Police Office and to forensic archaeologists looking on. A team began to dig. They started with a careful trench, precisely where the original mattock, the one found at the scene, had hung in the barn over a century ago, just 40 centimeters down. Their shovels hit something soft and yielding. It was rotting oilcloth, wrapped around a second mattock. This one was older, heavier. Its wooden handle darkened not just by age, but by something else entirely. Even in the dim light, the team knew this was different. Under the bright glare of portable lights, a hushed silence fell over the excavation site. This pneumatic was the missing piece. The blade, when examined, was still flecked with microscopic traces, evidence that no one could have seen or analyzed back in 1922. The team worked with meticulous care, knowing that the ghosts of 6 people were watching. Preserved within the grain of the wooden handle were tiny fragments of blood and hair. These samples were immediately rushed to the state lab in Munich for analysis. Weeks turned into a month, the anticipation building with each passing day. Then, the results came back, and they were staggering. The blood belonged to Victoria Gabriel and her 7-year-old daughter, Chiselia, 2 of the victims from that horrific night. The hair was even more revealing. It carried the same rare mitochondrial DNA markers found on the original mattock that had been sitting in an evidence locker for a century. This DNA pointed to a male lineage almost exclusively found in the Tyrolean Alps region. But the most astonishing discovery was yet to come. As forensic experts carefully cleaned the handle under high magnification, a faint carving emerged from beneath the layers of grime and time. The letters were crude but clear: J. Thaler 1919. Josef Thaler. The name sent a shockwave through the investigation. He was the itinerant laborer whose supposed confession, long dismissed, had been hidden away in that very 1922 police file. The truth was suddenly, brutally simple. Thaler had owned 2 mattocks. The one the killer had so carefully returned to its hook in the barn was a decoy, a deliberate piece of misdirection. This one, the one he buried, was the real murder weapon. He must have hidden it on the night he fled, trusting the dark forest and the passage of time to keep his terrible secret forever. In December of 2025, just over 103 years after the crime, the Bavarian police issued a short, dignified press release. The case of the 6 murders at the Hinterkaifeck Farm was no longer officially unsolved. Josef Thaler, the perpetrator, had been hanged in 1925 for an unrelated killing and could never face trial for his crimes at the farm. But the case file was finally updated with 2 simple words: Täter verstorben, perpetrator deceased. It was a quiet victory, a testament to modern science, patient detective work, and a buried tool older than most living Germans. Together, they had finally spoken for 6 souls who had waited in silence for a century beneath the snow-covered ground. Today, the clearing where the farm once stood is quiet again. The excavation trench has been carefully filled in, the moss and earth replaced so perfectly that only a faint, darker rectangle in the soil remains as a scar. Local rangers say that on the anniversary of the murders, March 31st, something strange still happens. Fresh footprints appear in the soft ground, leading from the tree line, and then they just stop. It seems some secrets refuse to stay completely buried. But for the first time in over 100 years, the people of the nearby village of Kaifeck can walk past the forest path without lowering their voices to a whisper. The question that haunted generations, the chilling mystery of who committed these brutal acts, finally has an answer. The wind still moves through the pines, but it sounds different now. It's gentle, almost peaceful. The 6 lives lost in one terrible night have finally received the only justice still possible, the truth, spoken clearly. After 100 winters of silence, thank you for watching. If you're fascinated by how modern science is solving history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories like this one. We'll see you in the next video.